Today I'm heading out for a walk to talk about an iconic British species that's under real threat. This species is so common that me and you see it every single day of our lives, and I bet some of us completely ignore it. We don't even notice it anymore. Whether you live by the seaside, in the middle of a town, or out in the countryside, I guarantee you see this British icon every single day. But this animal is under real threat of extinction in the next couple of decades. So today I'm going to reveal that animal and talk about why it's declining and what we can do to help. My name's Adam and welcome to Nature's Go. So you're probably wondering what animal I'm talking about. It's an icon of the British seaside, the seagull. If you've ever been to somewhere like Blackpool, you may well have a fridge magnet that has a Blackpool tower on it and loads of seagulls flying around. I've sat there and watched people feed the seagulls and even laughed as one swooped down and nicked your mate's chips. However, some seagull populations have dropped a whopping 72% in the past 55 years. In human terms, this is the equivalent of losing about 6 billion people since the 1970s, so they've dropped rapidly and in huge amounts. Now, I'll say this straight away as somebody's probably already ran to the comments to say it, but there's a common phrase, there's no such thing as a seagull. And this is true to an extent. Seagulls are sort of species of gulls, it's a collective name for them. We have 6, you could argue 7 common gulls that we see regularly here in the UK. They are the herring gull, the greater and lesser blackback gull, the Mediterranean gull, the black-headed gull, the common gull, and the Kittiwake. We also have about 10 or so other gull species that can be seen sort of rarely in the UK, often passing by on migration routes. However, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be referring to them as seagulls. We all know what I mean, and unless I'm talking about a specific species of gull, I'm going to say seagulls from here on out. So how under threat are our British seagulls? Well, every single one of the common species I mentioned just are on either the amber or the red list. These lists show what animals are declining and how rapidly they decline. If you're on the amber list, it means you're on the way down, but you're perhaps not a major concern as of yet. And if you're on the red list, then there's real concern. You could potentially even go extinct. Most of our British gulls are found on the amber list, but the herring gull and the Kittiwake are on the red list, meaning that, in the next couple of decades, they could genuinely be extinct. Now, I don't know if you agree, but as about 50 or 60 seagulls fly around behind me, I find it really hard to comprehend that they're on the decline. But because I see something every single day and in fairly decent numbers, doesn't mean it's doing well. Let's talk about why seagulls are declining. In my opinion, there's 4 major reasons as to why seagulls are on the decline. Food availability, suitable breeding habitat, bird flu make up the first 3. And there's one other one which I'll talk about later on in the video that I think is the key reason as to why seagulls are declining, and they may not be able to be helped. I'm sure you can guess by the name, seagulls historically are found by the sea, but now you see them absolutely everywhere. You can be in the centre of London and see a seagull, or you can be out in the middle of the British countryside and there'll be seagulls flooding farmers' fields. But why is this? The answer is unfortunately simple. As the world has sort of changed, fish stocks, fish found in the sea, have reduced at a dramatic rate. This means that the food seagulls tend to eat has become more and more competitive. They were basically fighting each other for who's able to get to the fish first. And because there's so much competition, they've decided to move inland, where food is more readily available. In the farmers' fields that I spoke about, they're trying to get worms. And in the urban towns and cities, they're ripping open bin bags and eating crumbs from your Greggs pastries. Now, I'm sure you can agree that rifling through bins isn't healthy for them. Imagine if you had to do it, you'd probably get sick after just a few days of doing it. So what about the seagulls that have remained here by the sea? Well, a lot of the nature has actually been taken out of their feeding. Why bother trying to hunt for fish or crabs when holidaymakers will feed you their fish and chips without you even having to move? And even though fish and chips isn't healthy, it's readily available. So this means throughout the summer, they don't have to move, they don't have to use energy, and they can get their food. But what happens in the winter when the holidaymakers all go home and they now have to hunt for their food again? If a seagull has spent most of its young life begging for fish and chips, then when the harsh winters come, it's going to really struggle to find food. It hasn't had the practice it needs to go out and find fish, to find crabs to eat, so it's really going to struggle. And in the winter, food is even more scarce. So you can see by a balance of sort of an unhealthy diet, not being able to find food, that this has really led to the seagull's decline. Then we look at their breeding habitat. Most gulls will lay their eggs on sand and shingle of remote beaches, and some of them, like the Kittiwake, will lay their eggs on cliffs. These suitable habitats are disappearing at a rapid rate. Storms are becoming increasingly more common in the UK, which means those higher up beaches that are usually protected are getting washed out as the high winds combine with high tides. You can also imagine how a bird nesting on a cliff may get their nest taken out in a high storm. To compensate for this, seagulls are starting to nest on top of people's houses, but they're defensive parents, which means they'll swoop if they think the nest is under attack. You can sort of imagine why somebody wouldn't want to walk out their house and get attacked by a seagull, so understandably, people don't want them nesting on their houses either. Well, this begs the question, where are they meant to nest? We once had 200,000 breeding pairs of herring gulls in the UK. That's now declined by 75% to just 50,000 pairs. Then we've got bird flu. The most recent spike of bird flu was in 2022, 23 and 24. It's sort of died down since then, but it was a real problem. I actually work with seabirds as part of my job, and as I was turning up to the nature reserve during the bird flu epidemic, there were birds sort of everywhere. I was finding 3, 4, 5 dead gulls every single day. As someone who saw it firsthand, trust me, it was horrible. It was estimated we lost around 30,000 black-headed gulls during that, which is about 10% of their population. During that most recent spike, the RSPB discovered a 25% decrease in nesting seabirds across the board, not just gulls. Bird flu spikes seem to be becoming a real problem now, and they're becoming more and more common, and this will really affect seagull populations heading into the future. There's one final reason, and that's villainization. And I think personally, this is the biggest threat to our seagulls here in Britain.
To some, they are an intimidating menace.
Like this story pretty much every year on breakfast, don't we? Seagulls nicking chips.
A number of English seaside towns are considering whether to cull their seagull populations after a string of attacks on people and their pets.
Wendy says, cull the seagulls. They swoop down on small kids, take anything in their hands. My chihuahua was nearly taken one. I had to hit it with a lead.
I'm sure you've all heard talks on the news, in the papers, of local radio, of how do we deal with this problem? How do we get rid of these pests? And it's the language that's used to describe the seagulls. If something is constantly referred to as a pest or a problem, then you're going to think negatively about it. And now that these seagulls really need our help, who's actually going to come to their rescue? Because everyone thinks they're the devil. Some of you watching may also be thinking the same, that seagulls are bad, that they're terrible. But I want you to ask yourselves, why are they really a problem? Okay, they might steal a few chips, but that's our fault for feeding them. Okay, they might tear open bin bags, but that's our fault for reducing their food supply. And okay, they might nest on our houses, but again, that's our fault for reducing the suitable nesting habitat that they have. Let me just twist it slightly for you. If a man goes into the woods and forages a load of herbs, some spices and loads of mushrooms, you're going to think that's really, really impressive. Someone who can go out into the wilderness and fend for themselves. Now, why are seagulls villainized for doing the exact same thing? They were struggling for food by the coast, they've adapted, they've changed their behaviour, and they're doing what they need to do to survive. That's just a little bit of food for thought. Do you think seagulls are a problem because you've seen it firsthand, or do you actually think they're a problem because the news has told you to think that way? As we come to the end of my walk, let's talk about what you can do to help out our seagulls. The first thing you can do is change the language you use to speak about them. Try not to refer them as pests or any annoyances, and challenge your friends or family when they say it as well. I know it's really difficult, but try not to feed them when you're at the beach. I know how easy it is to just throw a chip their way, but this really isn't helping. It's taking away their natural behaviour. Really, they need to be out finding their own food. That's how they're going to be able to survive. Finally, if you have the money to do so, I'd encourage you to look up the RSPB and the Wildlife Trust. They're doing some amazing work to protect our seagulls. If you can give, then become a member. It's about £2-3 a month. And that will really, really help out our seagulls and all the other wildlife across the country. That's it for this video. If you learned something, leave us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Comment your thoughts down below, whether they're good or bad. I'd love to hear what you think. Imagine what a day at the seaside would be like without hearing the sound of these guys, the seagulls, calling. It would be a true shame to lose a British icon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.